He flies to Las Vegas for WrestleMania. He posts online. He checks into a hostel. Then, suddenly, everything stops. No messages. No social media. No checkout. No contact with home. His belongings are still there, but he is gone. And for days, one of Britain's best-known Paralympic athletes seems to vanish in one of the busiest cities in the world. Before we go further, most people who watch these cases never subscribe, and then they miss the updates that matter. If you care about missing person cases, real investigations, and stories that still need answers, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment your location below. It helps more people see Samuel Ruddock's name. And in a case like this, that matters. Samuel Ruddock was not someone people expected to simply disappear. He was a Paralympian, a world champion, and a public athlete whose life had been shaped by discipline, resilience, and visibility. Born in Rugby, Warwickshire, he was diagnosed in infancy with spastic diplegia, a form of cerebral palsy affecting coordination in his lower body. But what stands out about Sam is not the diagnosis. It is what he did with his life after it. He built himself into an elite athlete across multiple sports, competing in sprinting and shot put before moving into track cycling, where he won world titles in the C1 kilometer time trial. He was also the kind of person who stayed connected. Friends described him as sociable, energetic, and active online. That detail matters, because in missing person cases, the first sign that something is wrong is often not one dramatic moment. It is a change in pattern, a silence where there should not be silence. And with Sam, the silence was immediate enough to alarm the people who knew him best. In April 2025, Sam traveled from the United Kingdom to the United States for what should have been an exciting trip. He had gone to Las Vegas to attend WrestleMania after arriving in the US on April 13th. This was not a disappearance in the middle of nowhere. This was Las Vegas. Bright lights, constant movement, crowds, hotels, cameras. One of the most heavily trafficked tourist environments in the world. If someone disappears in a place like that, it feels like the city itself should have answers. At first, nothing seemed obviously wrong. Sam was posting on social media while in Las Vegas. He appeared to be enjoying the trip, but then contact stopped. Friends and family later said the last time they heard from him was April 16th. After that, there was nothing. No reassuring message. No explanation. No normal follow-up that would make anyone think he had simply changed plans. That date quickly became the center of the timeline. April 16th. The last known point where Sam was still connected. What makes that moment so unsettling is how ordinary it probably looked at the time. Most disappearances do not begin with a dramatic warning sign. They begin with people assuming there will be another message tomorrow. Another post. Another check-in. Another small sign that everything is fine. With Sam, that sign never came. As concern grew, the people close to him started doing what families and friends always do first. They called. They messaged. They checked the obvious places. And then they found something that made the situation much harder to explain. Sam had been staying at a Las Vegas hostel, but he had not checked out, and his belongings were still there. That detail changed everything, because it suggested he had not simply left for a new hotel, changed travel plans, or casually moved on. Something had interrupted the ordinary flow of the trip. That is the moment this story stops being about travel and starts becoming a missing person case. A high-profile British athlete is alone in Las Vegas. He has not been heard from in days. His possessions are still behind. And the people who know him best are saying the same thing. This is not like him. As the alarm spread, the case drew public attention very quickly. British media began reporting that Sam had gone missing in Las Vegas after traveling to the United States for WrestleMania. Friends began appealing online for help. British Cycling also shared concern. The story moved beyond his immediate circle and into the public, where it took on another layer of urgency. Because this was not just a private disappearance anymore. This was now a missing person case unfolding across 2 countries. And yet, even with that attention, there were still major gaps. Publicly, there was no detailed explanation of exactly where Sam had gone after last being heard from. There was no public account of a confirmed incident. No clear public evidence of foul play. No public statement laying out a full movement-by-movement reconstruction of his last day in Las Vegas. There was just the silence, the abandoned belongings, and the growing fear that something had gone badly wrong. That uncertainty is what made the case feel so disturbing. Because Las Vegas is supposed to be visible. It is a city built around movement, surveillance, and constant activity. If someone vanishes there, the instinct is to believe the answer must be close. But cases like this show how quickly a person can still slip out of sight, even in the most public place imaginable. As the days passed, the concern only intensified. Reports said Sam had been missing for more than a week by the time the case began drawing widespread international attention. Authorities in Las Vegas were investigating. A missing person report was later confirmed to have been filed on April 24th. By that point, Sam had already been unheard from for days, and the gap between his last known contact and the formal report had become one of the most unsettling features of the story. Then came the detail that made the case even more haunting. This was not someone who had quietly drifted out of contact before. This was someone visible, recognizable, accomplished, a man with a sporting career, a public presence, and people actively looking for him. And still, for those days in Las Vegas, there seemed to be no answer to the most basic question in the case. Where was Sam Ruddock? The public reaction was immediate because the circumstances felt so wrong. He had traveled for a major event. He had seemingly been active early in the trip. Then he stopped communicating. His belongings were left behind. That combination made people fear the worst, even though there was no public proof yet of what had happened. And then, just as the worry was reaching its highest point, the story changed. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police said a missing person report had been filed on April 24th, and that through the course of the investigation, Sam had been located safe on April 28th. No detailed public explanation was given at the time for where he had been or what exactly had happened during those missing days. He was alive. He was safe. But the silence at the center of the case remained. Because being found safe answers the biggest question, but not every question. It ends the search. It does not automatically explain the disappearance. And in Sam's case, the public was left with a strange and unsettling outline. A champion athlete travels to Las Vegas, falls silent, leaves his belongings behind, triggers an international missing person appeal, and is then found safe days later without a full public account of what happened in between. That is what makes this story different. Not a confirmed crime, not a solved mystery, but a disappearance serious enough to alarm 2 countries, and a recovery that closed the emergency without fully closing the questions. So let me ask you this. When a missing person is found safe, but the public never learns exactly what happened, do you think those unanswered days should stay private, or do you think people are right to keep asking questions? Comment below. By the time this case reached the public, something had already worked against it. Time. Not months, not years, but enough days to create a gap. And in missing person cases, gaps are where uncertainty lives. Because once time passes without a clear timeline, investigators are no longer following events. They are reconstructing them. And reconstruction is never as strong as reality. When Samuel Ruddock stopped responding on April 16th, it did not immediately trigger a full-scale investigation. At first, it was concern. Messages sent. Calls made. People checking the normal explanations first. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he was out. Maybe he had changed plans. But as those possibilities started to fail one by one, the situation shifted. Concern became urgency. And urgency became a missing person case. A report was eventually filed with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. By then, several days had already passed since anyone had last heard from him. That delay matters, because the first hours in any disappearance are when details are still clear. Movements are still traceable. Decisions can still be followed step by step. Once those hours pass, everything becomes harder. Memories blur. Locations overlap. And small details that could have explained everything begin to disappear. When investigators began looking into Sam's disappearance, they faced a situation that felt both simple and complicated at the same time. Simple, because there were known facts. He had traveled to Las Vegas. He had been active online early in the trip. He had been staying at a hostel. His belongings were still there. And then he stopped communicating. Complicated, because everything that should have come after that was missing. There was no publicly confirmed timeline of where he went after his last contact. No detailed breakdown of his movements across the city. No clear explanation of what caused the sudden silence. And in a city like Las Vegas, that absence of clarity is unusual, because Las Vegas is built on visibility. Hotels track guests. Cameras cover entrances, streets, and casinos. Events like WrestleMania bring massive, organized crowds. If something happens, there is usually a trace. But in Sam's case, at least publicly, that trace never became clear. Investigators would have started with the same questions every case begins with. Where was he last seen? Who was he with? What was he planning to do next? And those questions lead to something important. Routine. Because people rarely disappear randomly. They disappear when something interrupts a pattern. And Sam had a pattern. He was traveling for an event. He had a place to stay. He had been communicating normally. So the real question becomes, what changed? One of the most significant details in this case is the hostel, because it creates a fixed point. Sam had checked in. He had a base. His belongings were there. And when he went missing, those belongings were still inside. That matters, because it suggests he did not leave in a planned way. He did not pack up and check out. He did not transition to another hotel. He did not move on with his trip. Something interrupted that normal flow. And when someone leaves without their belongings, it raises a different kind of question. Did they expect to come back? Or did something prevent them from returning? From there, the investigation would have expanded outward, tracking possible locations, checking nearby areas, reviewing any available footage, trying to build a path through the city. But this is where the case becomes difficult to follow from the outside, because very little of that investigative detail was made public. There was no detailed release of his last movements, no clear statement of where he had been in the hours before he stopped communicating, no public identification of any specific location that became the focus of the search. And that creates a strange kind of case, because usually missing person investigations become clearer over time. In this one, the public picture remained limited. As the case gained attention, people began trying to fill in the gaps themselves. And that is where speculation begins. Was he alone the entire time? Did he meet someone? Did something happen during the event? Did he leave voluntarily for a period of time? These are natural questions, but without confirmed answers, they stay as questions. Because one of the most important rules in cases like this is simple. If it cannot be confirmed, it cannot be treated as fact. There is also another layer that complicates this case. Travel. Because when someone disappears in their home city, investigators have context. They know the area. They know the people. They know the patterns. But when someone disappears while traveling, that context is weaker. New city, new environment, new variables, people they may have met only recently, places they may have visited only once. And in a city like Las Vegas, those variables multiply quickly because people come and go constantly, which means potential witnesses are harder to identify, movements are harder to track, and timelines become harder to confirm. As the days passed, the case reached beyond local attention. Media in the United Kingdom began reporting on the disappearance. Friends and organizations connected to Sam shared appeals online, and the case became something larger than a local investigation. It became international. A British Paralympian missing in the United States. That adds pressure, because now there are more eyes on the case, more expectation for answers, more urgency to resolve it. But pressure does not always produce clarity. Sometimes, it only highlights how little is known. And in this case, one thing became clear very quickly. There was no confirmed evidence of a crime, no public indication of foul play, no confirmed incident that explained the disappearance. Just a timeline that stopped suddenly, and a person who could not be located. That creates a different kind of investigation. Because when there is no clear crime, investigators have to consider multiple possibilities at the same time. Medical emergency, disorientation, voluntary absence, or something more serious that has not yet been discovered. And until one of those possibilities can be confirmed or ruled out, the case remains open in every direction. Then came the turning point. April 28th. After days of uncertainty, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police confirmed that Samuel Ruddock had been located. Alive. Safe. That moment changes everything. Because the focus of the case shifts immediately. From search to explanation. But in this case, the explanation never fully arrived. At least not publicly. Authorities confirmed he had been found safe. But they did not release a detailed account of where he had been or what had happened during those missing days. And that leaves something behind. A gap. Not in the timeline of when he was found, but in the story of where he was. For investigators, that gap may be understood. There may be a clear explanation. There may be details that were never made public for privacy reasons. That happens in cases like this. But for the public, the gap remains. And when a gap remains, people keep asking questions. Not because they want to intrude, but because the story feels incomplete. This is where the case becomes something different. Not an unsolved disappearance, but an unexplained absence. A period of time where something happened, but the details are not fully known. And that creates a different kind of tension, because the ending is clear. He was found. He was safe. But the middle of the story is not. And that leads to the central question of this case. Not where is he, but what happened during those days. Because those days are the entire mystery. Everything begins there. Everything ends there. And yet, they remain largely unexplained. So let me ask you this. When someone goes missing, is found safe, but the details are never fully shared, do you think the public should accept that privacy? Or do you think unanswered gaps like this always leave room for something more? Comment below. When a missing person is found safe, most people assume the story is over. Search ends, relief takes over, and attention fades. But that is not always how it works. Because sometimes, the moment someone is found is not the end of the story. It is just the point where the questions change. In Samuel Ruddock's case, the most urgent question was answered. He was alive. He was safe. And for his family, his friends, and the people who had been following the case, that mattered more than anything else. Because in missing person cases, not every story ends that way. But once that relief settles, something else begins. Understanding. Trying to make sense of what happened in the time between disappearance and discovery. And in Sam's case, that time still stands out. Several days. In a city that never stops moving. In an environment where people expect visibility. And yet, those days are not fully explained publicly. That creates a situation that is difficult to define. Because this is not a cold case. It is not unsolved in the traditional sense. There is no ongoing search. No active appeal asking, where is he? But at the same time, it does not feel completely closed. Because closure usually comes with clarity. And here, clarity is limited. After he was found, reports confirmed that Sam was safe, but there was no detailed public breakdown of his movements during the period he was missing. No step-by-step account. No timeline showing exactly where he had been. And that is not unusual. In many cases, especially when no crime is confirmed, details are kept private. For personal reasons, for medical reasons, for safety reasons. There are situations where sharing everything publicly does more harm than good. So information stays restricted. But that creates a contrast. Because before he was found, the case was public. People were sharing his name. Media outlets were reporting on his disappearance. There was urgency. There was attention. And then, suddenly, the urgency stops. The outcome is confirmed. And the details disappear. For some people, that is enough. He is safe. That is the only outcome that matters. Everything else is personal. Everything else belongs to him. And that perspective is valid. Because not every story needs to be explained in full. But for others, the unanswered portion of the story remains. Because the circumstances of the disappearance still feel unusual. A high-profile athlete traveling alone. A sudden loss of contact. Belongings left behind. Days without communication. And then a recovery without a detailed public explanation. That combination is rare enough to raise questions. Not about wrongdoing necessarily, but about what actually happened. And this is where cases like this become complicated. Because there are two different perspectives that exist at the same time. The private reality and the public curiosity. The private reality belongs to the person involved. What they experienced, what they went through, what led to those missing days. The public curiosity comes from the nature of the case itself. Because once a disappearance becomes public, people become part of the story. They follow it. They invest in it. They want to understand it. And when the explanation is limited, that curiosity doesn't disappear. It just becomes quieter. There is also something else that happens after cases like this. People begin to compare. They look at other missing person cases. They look at how those stories ended. Some are solved with clear answers. Some remain open for years. And some fall into a middle space. Found, but not fully explained. That middle space is where Sam's case sits. And it raises an important question about how we define resolution. Is a case resolved because the person is found? Or is it resolved when the full story is understood? Because those are two different things. And in this situation, only one of them is fully complete. From an investigative standpoint, once a person is located and confirmed safe, the case shifts immediately. It is no longer about searching. It becomes administrative, closing reports, confirming identity, ensuring safety. And unless there is evidence of a crime, the need for further public investigation may not exist, which means the system considers the case resolved. But from a narrative standpoint, it feels different. Because the central question is not just about outcome. It is about process. What happened between the last known contact and the moment he was found? And without that process being fully explained, the story feels incomplete. This is where assumptions can become dangerous. Because when information is limited, people start filling in the gaps themselves. They build theories. They connect unrelated details. They try to create a complete picture from incomplete information. And in doing that, they can move away from what is actually known. So it is important to separate what is confirmed from what is not. Confirmed. Samuel Ruddock traveled to Las Vegas. He stopped communicating around April 16th. A missing person report was filed. He was located on April 28th. He was safe, not publicly confirmed. Where he was during those missing days. What caused the loss of contact? What exactly happened in between? And that distinction matters, because it keeps the story grounded in fact. There is also a broader point that cases like this highlight. Disappearance does not always mean danger in the way people expect. Not every missing person case involves crime. Not every disappearance leads to a criminal investigation. Sometimes, the explanation exists, but it remains private. And that does not make the situation less real. It just makes it less visible. Still, the impact of those missing days remains. Because for the people closest to him, those days were real. They were filled with uncertainty, with waiting, with not knowing. And even when the outcome is positive, that period does not simply disappear. It becomes part of the story. And for the public, the case leaves behind a different kind of impression. Not fear of a confirmed crime, but awareness. The understanding that even in the most visible places, people can lose contact. Even in structured environments, something can interrupt a normal timeline. And sometimes, the explanation does not become public. That brings the case to its final position. Not unresolved, but not fully explained. And that is a rare place for a story to end. So let me ask you this. Do you think a case is truly closed once the person is found? Or does it only feel complete when every missing piece of the story is understood? Comment below. After everything, the concern, the headlines, the search, the silence, this case ends in a way most people hope for. Samuel Ruddock was found alive. He was safe. And in the world of missing person cases, that outcome matters more than anything else. Because not every story reaches that point. Not every disappearance ends with relief. Some end with confirmation. Some end with discovery. And some never end at all. But this one did, at least in the way that matters most. The search stopped. The urgency faded. And the immediate question, "Where is he?" was answered. And yet, even with that answer, something remains. Because this case does not end with a clear explanation. It ends with a space. A gap in the timeline that has never been fully detailed publicly. And that changes how the story feels. Because when you think about it, the structure of this case is unusual. There is a beginning, a trip to Las Vegas, an event, a normal pattern of communication, then a break, a sudden silence, days where contact disappears, and then an ending. He is found, safe, but the middle is not fully known, and that is where the tension stays. Most missing person cases move toward answers. They reveal something over time, a location, a sequence, a reason. But here, the outcome arrived before the explanation. And that creates a different kind of story. Because now, instead of asking what happened in the end, the focus shifts to what happened in between. Those missing days, the time where everything changed, the period where the normal pattern stopped. And this is where the case forces you to think differently. Not about danger, not about crime, but about information, about how much is shared, and how much is kept private. There are reasons why details are not always released. Personal safety, medical privacy, legal considerations. Sometimes, the full explanation exists, but it belongs to the individual, not the public. And that boundary matters, because not every story is meant to be fully visible. At the same time, cases like this naturally leave questions behind, because the circumstances feel incomplete. A visible person disappears in a visible city, leaves belongings behind, triggers an international missing person alert, and is then found safe without a detailed public account of those missing days. That combination is rare, and when something is rare, people pay attention to it. So the case sits in a unique position. It is not a mystery in the traditional sense. We know the outcome, but it is not fully explained either. We do not know the full process, and that creates two ways to look at it. One perspective says, the only thing that matters is that he was found. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is private, and that is enough. The other perspective says, when a case becomes public, when people are asked to care, to share, to follow, there is a natural expectation of understanding what happened, not out of intrusion, but out of closure. Both perspectives exist, and neither one fully cancels out the other. Because at the center of this case is a simple reality. Something interrupted a normal timeline. Something caused communication to stop. Something led to days where no one knew where he was. And then, that situation ended. Whether that interruption was serious, temporary, personal, or something else entirely, is not something the public has been fully told. And that is where the story settles. Not in fear, not in confirmed crime, but in uncertainty that remains. This case also leaves behind something else. A reminder that disappearance does not always follow a single pattern. It does not always mean the worst-case outcome, but it always creates the same feeling in the moment it happens. Uncertainty, the moment where people stop hearing from someone they expect to hear from, and nothing explains why. That is what makes those missing days matter, not just because they happened, but because they show how quickly a normal situation can change, even in a place designed to be seen, even for someone used to being visible. And that brings us to the final part of this story, not the outcome, but the interpretation, because this case asks you to take a position, not on guilt, not on crime, but on how you understand silence. So here's what I want to know from you. 1. Do you think cases like this should remain private once the person is found safe? 2. Or do you believe the public deserves to understand what happened during those missing days? 3. Do you think the lack of explanation changes how people view the case? 4. Is it possible that the full story is known, but intentionally not shared? 5. And the most important question, does being found safe mean the story is truly complete? Drop your answers in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and I want to hear what you think, because this case sits in a place where answers exist, but not all of them are visible. Because in the end, this is not a story about what was found. It is a story about what was missing, not a person, but time. Days that cannot be fully explained from the outside. A trip that started normally, a silence that changed everything, and a resolution that answered the biggest question, but left the rest behind. If you care about cases like this, where the outcome is known but the story still raises questions, subscribe and turn on notifications. We release new investigations every day. Comment your location below so we can see how far these stories reach. And if this case stayed with you, share it. Because even when a story ends safely, the unanswered parts are often what people remember the most.